All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests from Olney in Maryland. Michael D. Swain, Director of the East Asia Program at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. From London, Martin Jacques, author of the book When China Rules the World. And from Beijing, HuiyaoWang, founder of the Center for China and Globalization think tank. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Henry, let me start with you today. In this address, Secretary of State Blinken said, put simply, United States and China have to deal with each other for the foreseeable future. That's why this is one of the most complex and consequential relationships of any that we have in the world today. First of all, how does China feel about the relationship with the U.S.? And secondly, was China expecting this speech from Secretary of State Blinken?
Yes, thank you. I think that actually Secretary Blinken's speech last night was kind of expected, but also is quite also a bit surprised as well, because we were thinking after a Biden administration, a year and a half getting into its administration, we should be making some progress on this bilateral, most bilateral important bilateral relations in the world. But still, what we didn't expect that is Secretary Blinken actually made China the number one, major rivalry for the U.S. and also pose China as a threat to the global system, which I think is not really correct, because China is really China's rise is really good for the global economy and also for the global governance system. China has been contributing over 1/3 of global GDP growth. China become the largest trading nation with 130 countries, and China is actually lifted 800 million people out of poverty. It's this China's success is really embrace globalization, but also really contribute to the globalization. So I think U.S. and China should view each other as cooperation, but of course we have healthy competition as well, but not really making it as a threat, making it as an enemy, and making it as Secretary Blinken put it, set up alliance and then compete and then invest in this kind of alliance to compete, and that is not what we expect, I think. But of course, you mentioned about climate change and pandemic, many other areas that China and U.S. still can cooperate. But I think we should do more than that, not just on a rivalry of each other.
Michael, so as we heard from Secretary of State Blinken, as he was unveiling Washington's strategy to compete with China, he was also accusing Beijing of undermining global security. From your perspective, is that criticism justified?
Well, I think that criticism, like with many criticisms that are leveled by both China and the United States at each other, there's an element of truth in it, but it is inflated and distorted and exaggerated in ways that I think are not healthy and that really just reinforce the kind of zero-sum thinking that both sides increasingly have towards the other. China is a concern to the United States and to other countries in certain ways. But the biggest concern, as I often tell people, is not of specifically China's threat to the West or to other countries. It's the threat that's posed by the kind of interactive, worst-casing, zero-sum dynamic that is increasingly coming to the fore in interactions, in relations between China and the United States and some countries of the West. It's that dynamic that's driven by these kinds of gross, large, simplistic narratives that don't account for the different complex and cross-cutting interests that the countries face. It's that kind of narrative that's really the threat to the global order.
Martin, in this speech that was delivered by Secretary of State Blinken, he outlined Washington's grievances with Beijing. Why deliver this speech now? How significant is it, and what does it do to this relationship between the U.S. and China that is already really at a record low point?
Well, I think this is a speech we've been expecting for some time. It's a bit belated, actually, which is the Biden administration setting out its position on China. So I think that in that sense, we could see it coming. And so what does it suggest? I think it suggests that that now the key question for the US government is the relationship with China, which it sees as a rival. And I think that the problem is the subtext of this speech is, how does America hold on to its numero uno position in the world? Can it sustain that position? And the whole burden of the argument is in various fields, how does America do this? The tone of it in places is actually, I think, quite welcome, particularly in the back end of the speech, where Blinken suggests areas where they can cooperate. But really, the heart of it is about China's challenge to the position of the United States. And I'd just like to endorse one point that Henry made, which is that, this is a caricature, actually, of China's relationship with the international system, because ever since Deng Xiaoping, China has absolutely committed itself to the international system, seeking in the first instance to join it, and when it has joined it, has been a very strong proponent of it, and has, as it always says, in a very reasonable way, that it's been the great beneficiary of it. So this is really not an accurate presentation of the situation. What I would add to that, though, is that, of course, let's be realistic about this, that when you get the rise of a country the size of China and the speed with which that transformation has taken place, it is bound to change the world in profound ways. And no one can do anything about that. That is a reality. That's the great historic trend of our time, and it will continue into the future.
Henry, one of the ways in which this speech is being interpreted is that the U.S. is essentially saying that while we want China to rise, we also want to make sure that China is doing so within the parameters that the U.S. has set. And if we could extrapolate that a little bit more, one example would be, China has invested heavily in the Asia-Pacific region, whereas Western nations haven't been investing as heavily. Does China see it as arrogant that other countries are saying they don't want China encroaching on those territories, or that other countries are saying we want to see China do well, but only if it conforms to our standards of what they should be doing?
Well, I think he probably reflects that. That's correct. But actually, in the reality, actually, the real situation, I mean, look at those 13 members of India Pacific Economic Framework that you have just recruited. Most of them are neighbors of China, and many of them, actually, almost all of them, are largest trading partners with China. China is their largest trading partners. So how can U.S. come out of the blue? I mean, out of very far Pacific, to really say, hey, guys, let's get together, and then not allow the biggest, economy in the region be part of it. Just like what, U.S. used to, Obama administration designed the TPP, where it also have that similar function. But then China said, let's work with it. Let's join it. Let's work together. And the U.S. back off of that. So this, how long this IPEF can go, I don't know. But what I'm saying is that it's dangerous for the world to build up all those security and military alliances and drive up every country's military budget. We have a NATO expansion, we have Five Eyes, we have South Korea trying to join NATO intelligence war. We have AUKUS focused on nuclear submarine. We have, Quad, now it's a mini NATO, we're probably being formed. So whereas China, I think it's great, we should pursue this economic globalization of Belt and Road, AIIB, and RCEP, the largest free trade agreement, CPTPP, DIPA, CAI, China European Investment Treaty, and China African Cooperation. So let's do more economic, cooperation. If U.S. is doing that, and China is willing to be part of that, but not really trying to build up circles and then, preventing or blocking certain countries like China, which is already the largest economy in the region, and also one of the rising economy taking over U.S. probably in 10 years' time.
Now, when it comes to the U.S.'s relationship with China, you had President Biden in his recent comments on Taiwan. Those comments angered Beijing. On Tuesday, he said that the U.S. would respond militarily if the island was attacked. The White House later walked back those comments. But how much has that upset Beijing?
Well, I think it's quite upset. I mean, President Xi and President Biden have been talking virtually on the phone quite a few times. And every time President Biden said, we respect China, we don't want to seek to change China or seek alliance against China. We were abided by one China policy. But every time that when he talked to other people, he sounds different. So that's really, made China kind of difficult to understand.
Is what we're hearing currently from the Biden administration, whether it's this address from Secretary of State Blinken or whether it's President Biden's remarks with regards to Taiwan, does that signal a new policy toward China, or are things really more or less the same? I mean, is the stance that the Biden administration is taking toward China right now close to the stance that the Trump administration was taking toward China?
Yes, I think the simple answer to that is yes. Of course, there are certain differences of emphasis and tone, but basically what's been striking about the Biden administration is the extent to which it's more or less inherited the Trump position on China. It's less bombastic. It doesn't exaggerate in quite the same way that Trump did. But basically, I think we're witnessing a consensual shift in American politics towards a new antagonism towards China. I don't think we're in a new Cold War yet, but it certainly got aspects of that. And as Michael said earlier on, the danger of this kind of situation is that the more extreme, different situations can suggest more extreme views, extreme conflicts, and you get this slippage. And I think we've witnessed this in a number of ways so far, slippage towards a greater antagonism between the two countries. I mean, I think we're set, I'm afraid to say this, but I think this is going to go on for a long time. And in fact, in some ways, one of the interesting things about the statement, of course, it's not new, but one of the interesting things about the statement is that America is sort of preparing itself for the long haul in relationship to this. Hence, for example, the emphasis on the importance of improving American competitiveness, American economic capacities in lots of different areas. The truth is that America have, savagely neglected these kind of questions for a long time. And so any long-term strategy that America has, I think this has to be at the heart of the matter, because basically, China's been taking the US to the cleaners when it comes to this kind of thing over the last 20 years.
Michael, I saw you nodding along to quite a bit of what Martin was saying. It looked like you wanted to jump in, so please go ahead.
I want to make the point that for the Trump administration, I think the Trump administration's policy towards China was kind of chaotic. I mean, you had different messages being said by different people at different times. And then, of course, President Trump just riffs as he wishes. So the policy was really not very clear in many ways, except it did have a heavy ideological tinge to it and had a very heavy kind of trade balance tinge to it that was based on a very simplistic understanding of global trade. But it also wasn't very strategic. And I think where the Biden administration has altered that approach is they've become more organized. I wouldn't say fully strategic, but they've become more organized in that they are looking for coalitions and groups of other countries to strengthen their relations with other countries, allies and others, in order to develop a broader kind of strategy for countering China. But the problem with that is that underneath all this, as others have alluded, is the assumption, and you've seen it in Blinken's speech, that there really isn't much point in engaging the Chinese. We know what the Chinese are, and that's defined in very stark terms as a threat, almost an existential threat in almost every area. Yes, we can cooperate with them on areas where there's a strong common interest, like climate change, But if you're really in a zero-sum relationship with the Chinese of intense confrontational competition, it can't but influence greatly areas where you need to cooperate. Plus, what this statement, what this outlook suggests is that because you can't talk to the Chinese because it doesn't serve any purpose, because the Chinese won't really respond in good faith to you, therefore you can't really engage directly with the Chinese on truly divisive issues. You just sort of discount that as a basis for conversation with the Chinese and work on trying to shape, counter, contain the Chinese. That's the problem with the Biden strategy.
Henry, Michael just touched on something that you mentioned in a previous answer, and that's the fact that Secretary of State Blinken did say in his remarks that there are areas where the two countries should work together, including climate crisis, including combating COVID-19. From your perspective, where are there some other areas that the two countries feel they can actually work together constructively right now?
Yes, I think that I agree with what just Michael said. You know, the positive narrative that's going on in both countries are really damaging this relation and probably also dampen the confidence to cooperate in the future. But I think there's so much to collaborate. I mean, in addition to what Michael said on climate change and others, I think on the infrastructure, for example, you know, China is the leading country now for the last 4 decades. China has, you know, transformed the whole country. China now has 2/3 of the global speed railway. 10 largest container ports now, 7 of them are in China. And China have 5-6 million 4G, 5G stations across the country and 1 billion smartphone users. So that infrastructure now become a consensus. We see that, President Biden proposed 1.2 trillion infrastructure plan, and EU has announced a global gateway, 300 billion euro to put into that. So why not, we work together like what I talked to Larry Summers, let's have strengthen the development banks, replenish the World Bank. Let's get AIB in action. Let's get ADB, AFDB, Inter-American Development Bank. Let's get the development banks who share the same language to work together to tackle the deficit of infrastructure of many developing countries, including the developed countries. Let's find something similar to work together so that we can really not obsessed with our differences and exaggerate and then really, blow that out of proportion, and then we are really have to fight with each other in the end. So that's very dangerous, I think.
All right. Well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave our conversation there today. Thank you so much to all of our guests, Michael Swain, Martin Jacques, and Henry HuiyaoWang.